the moment my new daughter-in-law threw my wedding gift into a trash can. The entire reception went silent. She looked at the plain white envelope in her hand, laughed, and said, "I'm sure whatever's in here can't be worth much." Then, in front of more than 100 guests, she tossed it away like garbage. My son froze. I felt every eye in the garden turn toward me. What Emily didn't know was that inside that envelope was something I had spent years preparing for them, a gift that could change their entire future. And before the night was over, she would realize she had just thrown away the deed to her new house. But by then, it was already too late. If you've ever been judged because of how you looked, how much money people thought you had, or where you came from, I'd love to hear your story. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe if family stories like this speak to your heart. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I'm Susan Hartwell, and this is the story of the day my daughter-in-law learned that gratitude matters more than appearances. My name is Susan Hartwell, and for most of my life, being a mother was the role I loved more than any other. I was 64 years old when my son got married. By then, I had already lived through more heartbreak than I ever thought possible. 15 years earlier, I had buried my husband, Richard. One ordinary Tuesday morning, he left for work, kissed me goodbye, and promised he'd be home in time for dinner. He never came back. A distracted driver ran a red light. Just like that, the man I had spent 30 years building a life with was gone. At the time, Michael was only 20 years old. He was in college, still trying to figure out who he wanted to become. I remember sitting at our kitchen table the night after the funeral, staring at a stack of bills while Michael slept upstairs. The house felt impossibly quiet. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what loneliness felt like. But I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Michael needed me, so I kept going. I worked double shifts as a nurse at Riverside Methodist Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I picked up holidays, weekends, overnight rotations, anything that would help keep our lives together. There were years when I barely bought anything for myself. My winter coat was nearly 10 years old. My car had over 200,000 miles on it. I clipped coupons, waited for sales, skipped vacations. Not because I enjoyed sacrifice, but because every dollar I saved felt like another brick in Michael's future. And honestly, he made it worth it. Michael was a good boy, kind, respectful, hardworking, the kind of son who still called his mother every Sunday, the kind who remembered birthdays, the kind who carried groceries for elderly neighbors without being asked. As he grew older, he became the person his father would have been proud of. At least, that's what I believed. When Michael graduated and landed a job as a project manager for a construction company, I cried harder than I had at his college graduation. Not because of the paycheck, not because of the title, because I knew he was finally building a life of his own, a life that no longer depended on me. That's what every good parent wants. At least, that's what I wanted. Then one evening, about 3 years before the wedding, Michael called me. His voice sounded different, excited, nervous, happy. "Mom," he said, "I met someone." I laughed. "Only someone." He laughed too. "No, not just someone." And that was the first time I heard the name Emily Parker. At first, I was thrilled. I had spent years hoping Michael would find someone who loved him the way he deserved to be loved. Someone who would become his partner, his best friend, his family. The first time I met Emily, she seemed wonderful. She was beautiful, confident, smart. She worked in marketing for a growing company in Columbus. She dressed impeccably, spoke with confidence, and knew how to charm a room within minutes. I remember thinking how polished she seemed compared to the awkward young women Michael had dated in college. She brought flowers when she visited, complimented my cooking, asked questions about Michael's childhood. Everything appeared perfect. Maybe too perfect. At the time, I ignored that feeling. I wanted Michael to be happy, and happiness has a way of making us overlook small warning signs. A year later, Michael proposed. He called me immediately afterward. I could hear Emily crying with happiness in the background. I cried too. For the next few weeks, everyone seemed excited. Wedding plans, guest lists, venues, flowers, future dreams. But while everyone else was focused on the wedding, I found myself thinking about something else. A gift. Not a blender, not money in a card, not a fancy piece of jewelry. Something meaningful, something lasting, something that would help Michael and Emily start their lives together. You see, years earlier, shortly after Richard died, I had inherited a small piece of undeveloped land from my parents. Most people would have sold it immediately. I didn't. I held on to it for years. Eventually, property values increased, developers became interested, and one day, I sold part of that land for far more than anyone expected. Not enough to become wealthy, but enough to change my future. Most people assumed I spent the money. I didn't. Instead, I invested carefully, saved carefully, waited patiently. The truth was, I had always carried a private dream. A dream that one day, if Michael ever got married, I could help him begin his life without the burden of crushing debt, because I'd seen what financial stress could do to families. I'd lived it myself. So while Michael and Emily were planning centerpieces and seating charts, I quietly began putting my own plan into motion. I started looking at houses. Nothing extravagant. Nothing that screamed luxury. Just a warm, comfortable home in a safe neighborhood. A place where children could someday play in the backyard. A place where holiday dinners could happen around a crowded table. A place that felt like home. For nearly 8 months, I searched. Every weekend. Every evening after work. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with my friend David Mitchell. David had known me and Richard for decades. He understood exactly why I was doing it. One afternoon, we found it. A beautiful 3-bedroom house on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It wasn't huge, but it was perfect. The front porch reminded me of the home where Michael grew up. The backyard had enough room for a garden. The neighborhood was peaceful. The moment I stepped inside, I knew this was the one. I bought it outright. No mortgage, no loans, no debt. The entire purchase nearly emptied the savings I had spent years protecting. And I didn't regret a single dollar. Over the next several months, I quietly made improvements. Fresh paint, new appliances, landscaping, minor repairs. Every decision was made with Michael's future in mind. I imagined him walking through the front door. I imagined family dinners, grandchildren running down the hallway, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, a lifetime of memories. And all of it would begin with a wedding gift. What nobody knew, not even Michael, was that attorney James Collins had already begun preparing the paperwork. The deed would be transferred to Michael and Emily after the wedding. The documents were nearly complete. Everything was ready. All that remained was waiting for the big day. As the wedding approached, I found myself smiling more than I had in years. I truly believed my family was entering a beautiful new chapter. I believed Emily would appreciate the love behind the gift. I believed Michael had found the right woman. And most of all, I believed the future was bright. Looking back now, I realized something painful. Sometimes the biggest mistakes aren't made because we ignore obvious warnings. Sometimes they're made because we see only what we desperately want to believe. And at that point, I still believed Emily Parker would become the daughter I never had. I had no idea how wrong I was. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs clearly. The problem is that when you love someone, or when someone you love is happy, your mind has a remarkable ability to explain away things that should concern you. That's exactly what happened to me with Emily Parker. The first few months after Michael introduced us, I genuinely believed she was wonderful. She was polished in a way I never had been. She always knew what to say, what to wear, how to make people laugh, how to make herself the center of attention without appearing obvious about it. At family dinners, she would ask thoughtful questions. At birthday parties, she remembered everyone's names. At church events, she volunteered just enough to impress people. Everyone seemed to adore her. And honestly, I wanted to adore her too. After losing Richard, I had often imagined what it would be like to someday have a daughter-in-law, someone who might become part of the family, someone I could share holidays with, someone who would love Michael as much as I did. At first, Emily appeared to be that person. But little things began happening. Small moments, tiny comments. The kinds of things that seem insignificant when viewed individually. Yet together, they formed a picture I couldn't ignore. The first incident happened during a dinner at my house. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie. The same meal Michael always requested for his birthday. Emily walked into the kitchen while I was finishing dessert. She looked around and smiled. "Oh, wow," she said. "You really do everything the old-fashioned way." I laughed politely. "I suppose I do." She glanced at my appliances. "They're kind of vintage, aren't they?" I followed her gaze. My refrigerator was older. So was my stove. They worked perfectly fine. I simply saw no reason to replace them. "They still work," I said. Emily laughed. "I guess that's one way to look at it." The comment wasn't openly rude, not enough to confront, but something about her tone bothered me. I pushed the feeling aside. Then there was the shopping trip. About 6 months later, Emily invited me to join her while she looked for dresses. I thought it was a genuine gesture, a chance for us to bond. At first, everything seemed pleasant. We browsed stores, talked about wedding ideas, shared lunch. Then Emily picked up a designer handbag. The price tag was nearly $2,000. I nearly dropped my coffee. She laughed. "What?" I smiled awkwardly. "That's more than my first car cost." Emily stared at me for a second before laughing. "Oh my gosh, Susan." She turned toward the sales associate. "See, that's exactly why I can't imagine living like previous generations." The sales associate chuckled politely. I forced a smile. But inside, something felt uncomfortable. Not because of the money, because of the way she said it. As if people who lived differently were somehow less worthy, less sophisticated, less successful. Over time, similar moments kept appearing. Emily frequently talked about status, luxury, image, appearances. She loved posting photographs online. Perfect meals, perfect vacations, perfect outfits, perfect relationships. Everything seemed designed for an audience. One evening, I visited Michael's apartment unexpectedly. I had baked cookies and wanted to surprise him. When I arrived, he was still at work. Emily answered the door. The moment she saw me, disappointment flashed across her face. Only for a second. But I noticed it. "Oh," she said. "I didn't know you were coming." I held up the container. "I made cookies." "That's sweet." The words sounded polite. The tone didn't. She let me inside. As I sat in the living room waiting for Michael, Emily walked around picking up items and straightening decorations. Eventually, she looked at my shoes, then at my purse, then at my jacket. None of those things were expensive. They didn't need to be, but the look in her eyes made me feel strangely self-conscious, as though I were being evaluated, measured, found lacking. That feeling only grew stronger over the next year. The biggest problem wasn't what Emily said. It was when she said it. Whenever Michael was around, she became a completely different person. Warm, charming, affectionate. The perfect future daughter-in-law. But whenever we were alone, little cracks appeared. One afternoon, we were discussing wedding plans. Emily showed me photographs of a luxury venue. The cost was astonishing. I carefully suggested a few alternatives. "Nothing fancy, just practical options." She smiled. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Michael always tells me you're very careful with money." I nodded. "That's probably true." Her smile widened. "Well, that's because you had to be." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing." She laughed. "You know, different generations, different circumstances." I knew exactly what she meant. She thought I had spent my life settling, accepting less, living below her standards. Again. The comment was subtle, plausibly innocent, just enough to avoid confrontation, but enough to hurt. The strange thing was that Michael never seemed to notice these moments. Not because he didn't care, because Emily was incredibly skilled. She knew exactly how far she could go, exactly how much she could say, and exactly when to say it. I often wondered if I was imagining things. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe grief and aging had made me insecure. Maybe Emily simply communicated differently. I spent months making excuses for her. Then came the moment that changed everything. About 8 months before the wedding, Michael and Emily invited me to dinner at a trendy restaurant downtown. Everything seemed normal. Halfway through the meal, Michael excused himself to take an important work call. The moment he left the table, Emily leaned back in her chair. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me, directly. For the first time, there was no mask, no performance, no charm, just cold honesty. "You know," she said casually, "Michael is going to have a very different life from the one you had." I smiled carefully. "I hope so. Every parent wants that." Emily nodded. "Exactly." Then she took a sip of wine. "And honestly, that's probably for the best." The words landed like a slap. I stared at her. She smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, almost triumphantly. Then Michael returned to the table. And just like that, the mask came back. Emily laughed, touched his arm, asked about his phone call. The perfect fiancé had returned. Meanwhile, I sat silently, trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time, I wondered whether Emily actually respected me at all. For the first time, I questioned whether she saw me as family, and for the first time, a quiet fear began growing inside me. A fear I desperately wanted to ignore, because Michael was deeply in love, and because the wedding was approaching, and because I still wanted to believe I was wrong. Unfortunately, the closer we got to the wedding day, the harder it became to ignore the truth. The real Emily was starting to reveal herself, and what I saw frightened me more than I wanted to admit. As the wedding drew closer, it became impossible to ignore what was happening. The problem wasn't that Emily openly mistreated me. If she had, Michael would have noticed. No, Emily was far too clever for that. Instead, she slowly pushed me farther and farther away from every important part of the wedding. At first, I told myself it wasn't personal. Wedding planning is stressful. Every bride wants things done her way. That's normal. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. The first sign came when I learned they had chosen a venue. Not from Michael, not from Emily, but from Facebook. One Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee when I saw photographs posted online. Emily stood in a beautiful garden surrounded by wedding planners. The caption read, "Finally found the perfect venue." I stared at the screen. Nobody had mentioned venue tours. Nobody had invited me. Nobody had even told me they were looking. For a moment, I wondered if perhaps the decision had happened suddenly. Then I noticed the comments. Several friends were congratulating Emily. Apparently, they had been touring locations for weeks. I simply hadn't been included. The realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. When Michael called later that evening, I casually mentioned the venue. "Oh, yeah," he said. "We picked it last week." Last week. A whole week had passed. He hadn't even thought to mention it. I knew immediately why. Emily controlled nearly every conversation related to the wedding. Michael wasn't intentionally excluding me. He simply assumed I already knew. I smiled and congratulated him anyway. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room staring at family photographs. I remembered planning my own wedding. Richard's mother had been involved in everything. The flowers, the food, the invitations. Not because she demanded control, because she was family. Apparently, things were different now. A few weeks later, Emily invited me to lunch. For a brief moment, I thought perhaps things were improving. Maybe she wanted to include me after all. Instead, the lunch became one of the most uncomfortable conversations we'd ever had. We were discussing decorations. I suggested incorporating a few family photographs into the reception. Pictures of grandparents, parents, childhood memories, the kinds of things guests usually enjoy seeing. Emily immediately shook her head. Oh, no. The response was so fast, it surprised me. Why not? I asked. She smiled. I want the wedding to feel elegant. I waited. Surely there was more. Then she added, family photo displays can sometimes look a little cluttered. The word lingered in the air. Cluttered. As though family memories were decorations that didn't match her aesthetic. I nodded politely. Inside, my heart sank. The wedding wasn't about family. At least, not to Emily. It was about presentation, image, perfection. The months continued passing. Each new decision followed the same pattern. Flowers chosen without me. Music selected without me. Guest arrangements decided without me. Even rehearsal dinner plans happened without my knowledge. Whenever I tried offering help, Emily always had an excuse. Oh, we've already handled that. We're keeping things simple. We don't want you to worry. The words sounded considerate. The reality felt very different. Then came the dress incident. One evening, Emily invited several women from both families to a bridal gathering. Everyone was encouraged to bring ideas and inspiration. I spent hours preparing. I printed photographs, collected magazine clippings, made notes. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to feel useful. When I arrived, the room was already buzzing with conversation. Emily welcomed everyone warmly. At least everyone except me. Her greeting felt rushed. Forced. As though she had forgotten I was attending. Throughout the evening, every suggestion from her friends received enthusiastic discussion. Every idea from her mother received praise. Every recommendation from her cousins sparked excitement. When I finally shared one of mine, the room fell silent. Emily glanced at the photograph for less than 2 seconds. Then she smiled. That's sweet. Sweet. Not beautiful. Not useful. Not interesting. Just sweet. The conversation immediately moved on. By the end of the night, none of my suggestions remained under consideration. As I drove home, I couldn't stop wondering why. Had I really become that unimportant, or was Emily intentionally making me feel invisible? The answer came sooner than expected. About 4 months before the wedding, I attended a planning meeting at the venue. Michael couldn't make it because of work, so it was mostly Emily, her parents, the coordinator, and me. For most of the meeting, I remained quiet. The coordinator eventually asked whether either family wanted to contribute special traditions. Before I could answer, Emily spoke. We'd like to keep things modern. The coordinator nodded. Then she looked toward me. What about you? Susan. I opened my mouth. Emily interrupted before I could speak. Oh, Susan prefers very traditional things. The way she emphasized traditional made it sound like a disease. Everyone laughed politely. I forced a smile. But inside, I felt humiliated. For the rest of the meeting, I barely spoke. Afterward, I walked toward the parking lot alone. That's when I heard voices. Emily's voice. And another woman's. One of her bridesmaids. They were standing around the corner near the garden entrance. Neither realized I was nearby. At first, I wasn't paying attention. Then I heard my name. I froze. "Susan means well," the bridesmaid said. Emily laughed. "I know." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "I just don't want her making the wedding look outdated." The women laughed. My chest tightened. Emily continued. "Honestly, she doesn't really fit the image we're creating." Fit the image. I can still hear those words. Not fit the family. Not fit the wedding. Not fit the image. Because to Emily, appearances mattered more than people. I quietly turned around before they saw me. Then I walked back to my car. The drive home felt endless. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table for hours. Part of me wanted to confront her. Part of me wanted to tell Michael everything. But another part of me worried I would only create conflict. I convinced myself to stay silent. Again. Because Michael loved her. Because the wedding was approaching. Because I didn't want to be the reason for family drama. Looking back now, I understand something important. Silence often feels like kindness. But sometimes silence simply gives disrespect permission to grow. And Emily's disrespect was growing rapidly. What she didn't know was that while she was worrying about appearances, I was quietly preparing the most meaningful gift anyone at that wedding would receive. A gift that represented years of sacrifice, years of love, years of planning. A gift she would soon dismiss with a single careless gesture. And when that day arrived, it would change everything. About 3 months before the wedding, I stopped trying to be included. Not because I didn't care, because I was tired. Tired of pretending I didn't notice the exclusion. Tired of acting as though Emily's behavior didn't hurt. Tired of making excuses for someone who clearly had no interest in treating me like family. Instead, I focused my energy on something else. The gift. The house. The future I still hoped Michael would have, even if Emily never appreciated me. I wanted my son to know he was loved. That had always been my goal. And at that point, I was willing to endure almost anything to make it happen. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I met David Mitchell at a small coffee shop near downtown Columbus. David had been one of Richard's closest friends. Over the years, he had become family. The kind of friend who shows up when you need help moving furniture. The kind who brings food after funerals. The kind who tells you the truth even when it hurts. He was already sitting at our usual table when I arrived. "How's wedding planning?" he asked. I laughed. "Do you want the honest answer?" "Always." I sat down and sighed. I've never felt more unwanted in my life. David frowned. "It's gotten worse." I nodded. Then I told him everything. The comments, the exclusion, the conversation I overheard at the venue, the growing feeling that Emily viewed me as an embarrassment. David listened quietly. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Susan, are you sure you still want to go through with this?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "The house." I stared at him. David lowered his voice. "You're talking about transferring nearly $400,000 worth of property to a woman who doesn't respect you." The words hit hard because they were true. For a moment, I had no answer. Eventually, I looked down at my coffee. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for Michael. David nodded slowly. I know. Then he added something I didn't want to hear. Just make sure you're seeing things clearly. That conversation stayed with me for days. Not because it changed my mind, but because it forced me to confront a difficult truth. I wasn't giving the house to a grateful young couple starting their lives together. I was giving it to Michael and Emily. Both of them. Whether I liked it or not. The following week, I met with attorney James Collins. James had handled several legal matters for me over the years. He was meticulous, professional, and remarkably patient. His office occupied the second floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. I remember sitting across from him as he spread documents across his desk. Everything is ready, he said. The transfer paperwork can be executed immediately after the wedding. I studied the papers. Michael Hartwell, Emily Parker, future owners. Seeing their names together made everything suddenly feel real. James slid a folder toward me. This will be the final version. I opened it carefully. Inside were property records, transfer documents, legal descriptions, every piece of paperwork necessary to give them the house. I felt my throat tighten. Years of planning, years of saving, years of sacrifice, all contained inside a simple folder. You okay? James asked. I smiled. Just emotional. He laughed softly. That's understandable. Then he became serious. You know, Susan, most parents don't do things like this. I looked at him. What do you mean? Most parents help with wedding expenses. He tapped the folder. Very few buy an entire house. I shrugged. Michael deserves a good start. James smiled. He's lucky to have you. The words meant more than he realized. Because lately, I hadn't felt appreciated by anyone. Not Emily. And sometimes, not even Michael. After leaving the office, I drove to the house. I often did that when I needed peace. The property sat on a quiet street lined with mature maple trees. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalks. Neighbors waved to one another. The neighborhood felt safe, comfortable, home. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was empty, yet somehow it never felt lonely. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows. Fresh paint brightened the walls. The hardwood floors gleamed. I slowly walked from room to room. The kitchen, the dining area, the guest bedroom, then the master bedroom. I stood by the window and imagined Michael there. I imagined him carrying groceries through the front door. I imagined family dinners, birthday celebrations, future grandchildren running through the hallway. The vision was so vivid that it brought tears to my eyes. This wasn't just real estate. It wasn't an investment. It was love, solidified into walls and foundations, transformed into something tangible, something lasting, something a mother could leave behind. As I stood there, my phone rang. Michael. A smile immediately crossed my face. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded exhausted. Wedding stress. I recognized it immediately. Everything okay? Yeah, just busy. We talked for a few minutes. Work, wedding details, life, the usual things. Then he said something that stayed with me. Mom. Yes? I know planning has been crazy lately. I waited. He continued. But I hope you know how much I love you. The words caught me completely off guard. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Because despite everything, despite Emily, despite the distance that had developed, he was still my son, still the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street, still the young man I had spent decades raising. I love you too, I whispered. After the call ended, I sat in the empty living room for a long time, thinking, remembering, hoping. Maybe everything would work out. Maybe marriage would mature Emily. Maybe the tension would eventually disappear. Maybe family relationships simply needed time. That night, I called David. I've made my decision. I figured you had. I'm giving them the house. He sighed softly. You're sure? Yes. Then I'll support you. I smiled. Thank you. A few days later, we met again. This time, at my house. The folder containing the deed sat on the dining room table. David looked at it, then looked at me. You know, he said, there's still time to tell Michael beforehand. I shook my head. No. Why not? Because I had imagined the moment too many times. I wanted to see Michael's face. I wanted to watch his surprise, his happiness, his relief. I wanted one perfect memory. One moment untouched by conflict. I want it to be a surprise. David studied me for a moment, then smiled. You're a better person than most people I know. I laughed. No, I'm just a mother. As the wedding day approached, my excitement returned. The folder remained hidden. The paperwork remained secure. Everything was ready. What I didn't realize was that while I was dreaming about giving away the greatest gift I'd ever prepared, Emily was about to prove exactly who she really was. And when she finally did, it wouldn't happen privately. It wouldn't happen quietly. It would happen in front of more than 100 people, and it would change all of our lives forever. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and beautiful. Ironically, it was exactly the kind of day every bride dreams about. The sky was clear. The temperature was perfect. Not a single cloud interrupted the endless blue stretching across the Ohio sky. As I stood in front of my bedroom mirror that morning, I carefully adjusted the necklace Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary. It wasn't expensive. A simple gold chain with a small heart-shaped pendant. But it was one of the few pieces of jewelry I truly treasured. For a long moment, I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed older than I felt. Gray hair, fine lines around my eyes, a face shaped by years of work, grief, sacrifice, and love. I smiled softly. Richard, I whispered, I wish you were here. Because more than anything, I wanted him beside me that day. I wanted him to see Michael get married. I wanted him to see the house, the gift, the future we had both dreamed about for our son. But life doesn't always give us the endings we imagine. An hour later, I arrived at the venue. The garden was breathtaking. White roses lined the pathways. Elegant decorations hung from carefully arranged archways. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Guests mingled beneath large white tents. Everything looked like it belonged in a wedding magazine. Emily would have loved that comparison. Image mattered to her, perhaps more than anything else. I checked in with the coordinator and immediately noticed something strange. My seat assignment. I was seated near the back, far from the head table, far from Michael, far from the immediate family section. At first, I assumed there had been a mistake. Then I noticed where Robert and Linda Parker were seated. Front row, center table, premium placement. The coordinator apologized awkwardly. These were the seating instructions we received. I forced a smile. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. I was the groom's mother. Yet somehow, I had been placed farther away than several distant cousins and business acquaintances. The message was clear. Again. You don't belong in the picture. You don't fit the image. I swallowed my disappointment and sat down. I wasn't going to let Emily ruin the day. Not completely. After all, Michael looked happy, and that still mattered to me. The ceremony itself was beautiful. When Michael walked down the aisle, my eyes filled with tears. For a moment, all the hurt disappeared. I saw the little boy who used to sleep with a stuffed dinosaur, the teenager who learned to drive in my old Honda, the young man who helped me carry groceries after long hospital shifts. I saw my son, and I loved him with every piece of my heart. When he smiled during his vows, I cried. When he slipped the ring onto Emily's finger, I cried again. Even Emily seemed genuinely emotional. For a brief moment, I wondered whether perhaps I had judged her too harshly. Maybe marriage would change things. Maybe today marked a fresh beginning. Maybe. The reception began shortly afterward. Music filled the garden. Servers moved between tables, carrying trays of food and champagne. Guests laughed, danced, celebrated. David and Karen sat beside me. Both knew about the house. Both knew what was inside the plain white envelope resting carefully inside my purse. Several times, David asked if I was nervous. The truth, I was terrified. Not because of the gift, because of what it meant. Years of sacrifice. Years of planning. Years of hope. Everything was contained inside that simple envelope. The transfer documents, the deed, the legal paperwork, a future. As the evening progressed, the time finally arrived for the gift presentation. Emily had specifically requested a public gift acknowledgement segment. Apparently, she thought it would be entertaining. Guests gathered around. Several family members stepped forward. Checks, gift baskets, travel vouchers, kitchen appliances, the usual wedding presents. Each one received applause. Then my turn came. My heart pounded. I stood slowly. The envelope felt surprisingly light in my hand, considering how much it represented. I approached Michael and Emily. Michael smiled warmly. "Mom." His eyes softened. I saw genuine affection there. That made everything harder. I handed the envelope toward Emily. She accepted it with a polite smile. For one brief second, I allowed myself to imagine what would happen next. She would open it, see the documents, realize what they meant, cry, hug Michael, maybe even hug me. For one beautiful moment, we would feel like a family. Instead, something else happened. Emily looked down at the envelope. Her smile faded. The envelope was plain. No expensive wrapping, no decorative ribbon, no luxury branding, just a simple white envelope, the kind you might buy at any office supply store. She turned it over in her hands, then laughed. At first, I thought she was joking. Then she spoke. Let me guess. Several guests chuckled politely. Emily looked directly at me. This is one of those heartfelt letters, isn't it? A few people laughed. My stomach tightened. I smiled uncertainly. Why don't you open it? Emily rolled her eyes dramatically. The crowd laughed again. She waved the envelope in the air. Oh, come on. Her voice carried easily through the reception area. We all know Susan isn't exactly giving us a Caribbean honeymoon. More laughter. English. Uneasy this time. Not everyone seemed comfortable. My face grew warm. I glanced toward Michael. His smile had disappeared. Emily continued. I'm sure it's sweet. Then she shrugged. But honestly, whatever's inside probably isn't worth all this suspense. The words hit like a slap. The garden suddenly felt silent. I heard someone clear their throat. A chair scrape against stone. The distant sound of the string quartet. Every detail seemed amplified, because deep down, everyone knew something was wrong. I looked at Michael again. He seemed frozen, confused, embarrassed. But he still said nothing. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Emily walked toward a nearby trash container, still holding the envelope, still smiling, still completely unaware of what she was doing. For a split second, I thought she would stop, that common sense would intervene, that she'd laugh and return. Instead, she dropped the envelope directly into the trash, then brushed her hands together, as if discarding something worthless. The entire reception fell silent. Complete silence. No music. No laughter. Nothing. I heard Karen gasp beside me. David muttered something under his breath. Several guests stared in disbelief. Even Robert and Linda looked uncomfortable. Emily seemed confused by the reaction. She glanced around. What? Nobody answered, because nobody knew what to say. I felt my heart breaking. Not because of the house, not because of the money, because of the disrespect, the cruelty, the complete lack of gratitude. Years of sacrifice had just been thrown away like garbage. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that my son had witnessed everything. I slowly walked toward the trash container. Every eye followed me. Emily watched with mild amusement, still believing she was in control, still believing she understood the situation. She couldn't have been more wrong. I stopped beside the trash can, looked at the envelope inside, then looked directly at her. The entire garden waited. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Some gifts, I said quietly, are only valuable to people who understand gratitude. Emily frowned, clearly confused. Michael's expression darkened. Something about my voice had finally caught his attention. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then I turned around and walked away. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply left. Behind me, confusion spread through the crowd, and for the first time all evening, Emily Parker looked genuinely nervous, because somewhere deep inside, she had begun to realize she might have made a terrible mistake. I don't remember much about the walk to my car. Not because it happened too long ago, because my mind was overwhelmed. Sometimes emotional pain becomes so intense that the details blur together. I vaguely remember hearing voices behind me, guests whispering, chairs moving, music stopping, someone calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I had stopped, I knew I would cry. And after everything that had happened, I refused to let Emily Parker see my tears. The parking lot was nearly empty. Most guests were still inside enjoying the reception. I reached my car, unlocked the door, and sat behind the steering wheel. For several seconds, I simply stared forward. My hands trembled. My chest hurt. My throat felt tight. Then the tears came. Years of grief had taught me how to cry quietly. When Richard died, I learned how to cry alone. When hospital shifts became overwhelming, I learned how to cry in empty supply rooms. When Michael moved away after college, I learned how to cry without letting anyone notice. But this was different. This wasn't grief. This was humiliation. The kind that settles deep inside your bones. The kind you never forget. I lowered my head onto the steering wheel and cried harder than I had in years. Not because of the house, not because of the money, because I had spent years trying to welcome Emily into my family. Years making excuses for her behavior. Years convincing myself she would eventually see my heart. And in the end, she had thrown my love into a trash can. A soft knock startled me. I looked up. David stood beside the driver's side window. Concern covered his face. I unlocked the door. He climbed into the passenger seat without saying a word. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he handed me a handkerchief. The gesture was so old-fashioned that it almost made me laugh. Almost. "Thank you," I whispered. David nodded. Then he said the one thing I desperately needed to hear. "Susan, none of this was your fault." That nearly started the tears all over again. "I should have listened to you." "No. David, you warned me. I asked questions. You warned me." He shook his head. "I warned you because I care about you." His voice remained calm. "But Emily's behavior belongs to Emily." I looked out the windshield. The reception venue glowed in the distance. Lights, music, laughter, a celebration continuing without me. "Michael just stood there." The words escaped before I could stop them. David sighed. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Because I was thinking it too. Michael had seen everything, and he had done nothing. Not defended me, not stopped Emily, not spoken up. Nothing. I know, David said quietly. That hurt almost as much as Emily's actions, because my son wasn't cruel. He wasn't selfish. He wasn't unkind. Yet somehow, in the most important moment, he had failed me. I wiped my eyes. What happens now? David studied me carefully. You tell me. I already knew the answer. Perhaps I had known it the moment the envelope hit the trash. Maybe even before that. I can't give them the house. The words hung between us. Heavy. Final. Real. David nodded slowly. I agree. For a long moment, I stared at the wedding venue, thinking about Michael, thinking about Richard, thinking about every extra shift, every sacrifice, every dollar saved. Not because I regretted any of it, because I suddenly understood something important. Love and reward are not the same thing. I would always love my son. Nothing could change that. But giving someone a gift worth hundreds of thousands of dollars required more than love. It required trust, respect, gratitude. And at that moment, those things no longer existed. I took a deep breath, then reached for my phone. Attorney James Collins answered on the second ring. Susan? Hi. James? You sound upset. I need a favor. His tone immediately became professional. What happened? I looked at David, then told James everything, every detail, every word, every humiliating second. By the time I finished, there was silence on the line. Finally, James spoke. Are you certain? Yes. No hesitation. I glanced back toward the venue. The answer came surprisingly easily. No hesitation. Then I'll stop the transfer process immediately. Relief flooded through me. Not happiness. Relief. As though I had finally put down something heavy. Thank you. We can discuss the paperwork Monday. Okay. The call ended. I stared at the dark screen. Just like that. Everything had changed. The house remained mine. The future I had planned no longer existed. And strangely enough, I felt calmer. Not because the situation was fixed, because a decision had been made. Sometimes clarity arrives only after heartbreak. My phone rang almost immediately. Michael. I stared at his name. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to answer. Part of me wanted to hear his voice. Part of me wanted him to explain. Apologize. Say something. Anything. Instead, I let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, he called again, then again, then again. I ignored every call. Not out of spite, because I wasn't ready. I had spent years putting everyone else's feelings before my own. For one night, I needed space. Nothing more, nothing less. By the time David and I finally drove away from the venue, my phone showed 12 missed calls. 8 from Michael, 3 from unknown numbers, 1 from Emily. I laughed bitterly when I saw her name. Now she was calling. Interesting. Very interesting. David noticed my expression. "What is it?" I showed him the screen. His eyebrows rose. Emily called. "Apparently." "That's unexpected." I nodded. At the time, neither of us understood why. We would soon, very soon. When we reached my house, David parked behind me. Before leaving, he turned toward me. "I need to go back." I blinked. "What?" "The envelope." For a second, I had forgotten about it. The deed, the documents, the folder. Everything was still sitting inside that trash can. David continued. "If those papers are still there, somebody needs to retrieve them." He was right. My stomach tightened. The entire future of that property sat inside a garbage container. And despite everything, I didn't trust Emily not to destroy it completely. "I'll go?" David shook his head. "No. I can handle it." "I know you can." His expression softened. "But you shouldn't have to." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. "Thank you." David smiled. "What are old friends for?" An hour later, he called. The moment I answered, I heard satisfaction in his voice. "I got it." Relief washed over me. "The paperwork's okay." Perfect condition. I closed my eyes. Thank God. Then David said something unexpected. "Susan." "What?" "The reception was a disaster after you left." I sat upright. "What happened?" David laughed softly. "Let's just say people had questions." My pulse quickened. "What kind of questions?" "The kind Emily couldn't answer." For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of curiosity, maybe even justice, because somewhere back at that reception, Emily Parker was beginning to realize she had made a mistake. Not a small mistake. Not an embarrassing mistake. A life-changing mistake. She just didn't know how big it was yet. But by tomorrow, she would. And when she finally learned what had been inside that envelope, panic would replace arrogance faster than I ever thought possible. The morning after the wedding felt strangely peaceful. Not happy, not healed, just quiet. For the first time in months. There were no wedding plans, no forced smiles, no attempts to convince myself that everything was fine. The truth had finally revealed itself. Painful as it was, there was a certain freedom in that. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat on my back porch watching the sunrise. My phone remained on the table beside me. Dozens of missed calls. Voicemails. Text messages. Most from Michael. Several from Emily. A few from unknown numbers I suspected belonged to members of the Parker family. I ignored all of them. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed time to think. For years, my entire focus had been on Michael's future. Now I had to decide what my own future would look like. As I sipped my coffee, my eyes drifted toward the folder resting on the kitchen table inside. The folder, the house, the gift, the dream. It was amazing how much emotional weight a stack of papers could carry. I walked inside and picked it up. For several moments, I simply held it. Then I opened it. The deed sat exactly where it always had. Untouched, safe, protected. And suddenly, memories began flooding back. Not memories of the wedding, memories of everything that came before. The story of the house, the story Emily never knew, the story Michael never fully understood, the story that began nearly 10 years earlier. Back then, I wasn't thinking about weddings. I wasn't thinking about grandchildren. I wasn't even thinking about retirement. I was simply trying to survive. After Richard died, money became a constant concern. Nursing paid the bills, but it wasn't enough to create real security. Every month felt like a balancing act. Mortgage payments, insurance, car repairs, medical expenses. Life had a way of finding new ways to cost money. Then came the inheritance. My parents had owned a modest piece of land outside Columbus for decades. Nothing special. Just several acres that had remained in the family for years. When both of them passed away, the land came to me. Most people advised me to sell it immediately. But something stopped me. Maybe instinct. Maybe caution. Maybe hope. Whatever the reason, I kept it. For years. Then Columbus began expanding. New developments appeared. Businesses moved into the area. Property values increased dramatically. One afternoon, a developer contacted me with an offer. I nearly dropped the phone when I heard the number. The land was suddenly worth far more than anyone had imagined. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the proposal. Part of me wanted to spend the money. After all, I had worked hard. I had sacrificed enough. I deserved something nice. A better car. A vacation. A renovated home. 1,000 possibilities filled my mind. But another thought kept returning. Michael. His future. His family. His stability. The same answer that had guided my decisions for most of my life. So I sold a portion of the land, invested carefully, saved aggressively, and promised myself something. If Michael ever needed help starting his life, I would be ready, not because I wanted control, not because I expected gratitude, because parents spend their entire lives trying to give their children opportunities they never had. That promise eventually became the house. I still remember the first day I saw it. David was with me. We had already visited more than 20 properties. Most were disappointing. Too expensive, too damaged, too small, too far away. Then we arrived on Maple Ridge Lane. The neighborhood immediately felt different. Children played basketball in driveways. Neighbors waved from front porches. The streets were clean. The trees were mature. The entire area radiated warmth. The moment I stepped inside the house, something happened. I could picture Michael there. Not abstractly, clearly, almost as though I were watching the future unfold. I saw him carrying groceries into the kitchen. I saw family photographs hanging on the walls. I saw holiday decorations in the living room. I saw grandchildren racing through the hallway. The vision was so vivid it nearly brought tears to my eyes. David noticed. "You found it." I laughed. "I think I did." 3 weeks later, The house became mine. I paid cash. No mortgage. No debt. No financial burden. The closing process emptied most of the funds I had spent years protecting. Yet I walked away feeling richer than ever, because I wasn't buying property. I was buying possibilities. Over the following year, I transformed the house. Every improvement carried a purpose. Fresh paint, updated appliances, landscaping, minor repairs, new flooring in 2 rooms, a renovated guest bathroom. I personally selected every detail, not based on what I liked, based on what Michael would need. I even planted rose bushes near the front porch, the same variety Richard had planted at our first home. Sometimes I'd visit the property after work and spend hours there alone, walking through empty rooms, imagining future conversations, future birthdays, future memories. Some people might find that strange, but mothers understand. We spend our entire lives imagining our children's futures. It's impossible not to. One afternoon, while standing in the backyard, I called David. I think I'm going to give it to him as a wedding gift. There was silence. Then David laughed. Only you would buy an entire house and call it a wedding gift. I laughed too, but I was serious. The idea felt right. The house represented everything I wanted Michael to have: security, comfort, a strong foundation, a chance to begin marriage without overwhelming debt. Months later, when Michael announced his engagement to Emily, the decision became final. I contacted attorney James Collins. The paperwork process began. Legal reviews, property transfers, tax planning, document preparation. Everything moved forward. The final deed transfer was structured to occur immediately after the wedding. The timing felt symbolic. One chapter ending, another beginning. At least, that's what I believed. Now, sitting alone at my kitchen table the morning after the wedding, I realized how close everything had come to happening. If Emily had simply accepted the envelope, if she had shown basic courtesy, if she had treated me with even a small amount of respect, the house would already belong to them. Instead, the documents sat safely in front of me, still mine, still protected, still waiting. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Michael. It was Karen Mitchell. I answered. "Good morning." Karen sounded hesitant. "Susan, are you okay?" "I'm getting there." She paused. Then she said something unexpected. "Emily knows." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "She found out about the house." I sat upright. The silence stretched between us. Then Karen continued. "And she's completely panicking." For the first time since the wedding, I felt something shift, because Emily Parker had finally learned what had been inside that envelope. And according to Karen, the realization had hit her like a freight train. The arrogant confidence, the superiority, the mockery, all of it had vanished overnight. And if Karen was right, Emily was about to do everything in her power to fix a mistake that could no longer be undone. I wish I could say Emily's realization transformed her instantly. I wish I could tell you that the moment she learned the truth, she was overwhelmed by guilt, that she cried because she had hurt me, that she regretted her cruelty, that she finally understood the pain she had caused. But that isn't what happened. At least, not at first. The truth came out less than 24 hours after the wedding. And when Emily finally discovered what had been inside that envelope, her first reaction wasn't remorse. It was panic. Pure panic. Karen told me the story later. Apparently, the reception had never recovered after I left. Guests continued whispering. Questions spread through the crowd. Why had Susan left? Why had the groom's mother looked so devastated? Why had Emily thrown away a gift before opening it? And perhaps, most importantly, why had Susan seemed so calm? People expected tears, anger, a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I had simply walked away. That confused everyone, including Emily. According to Karen, Emily spent the rest of the reception pretending everything was normal, smiling for photographs, greeting guests, dancing, laughing. But she kept looking toward the entrance, waiting for me to return. I never did. The following morning, Emily and Michael were opening gifts at their apartment. At least that was the plan. Family members had delivered cards, checks, gift boxes, household items, everything newlyweds usually receive. Somewhere during that process, Karen happened to mention my gift. The comment seemed innocent. At first, Karen told me she had simply said, "It's such a shame what happened with Susan's envelope." Emily reportedly laughed. "The envelope?" Karen nodded. "Yes." Then she added the sentence that changed everything. "I heard Susan bought a house." Emily froze. Karen didn't notice immediately. She continued speaking. "David told my husband she spent years preparing that gift." The room went silent. According to Karen, Emily's face lost all color. "What house?" Karen frowned. "The house Susan bought for you and Michael." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Michael stared at Karen. Karen stared back. Then realization slowly spread across the room. Emily reportedly whispered, "What did you just say?" Karen repeated herself, this time more slowly. And suddenly, the impossible truth became clear. The envelope, the trash can, the gift, the house, everything connected, everything made sense. And Emily understood exactly what she had done. Michael apparently stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over a chair. "What house?" Karen explained everything she knew. The property, the deed, the years of planning, the transfer paperwork, the surprise gift, every detail. When she finished, the room remained completely silent. Emily's reaction was immediate. She ran to the trash. Of course, there was nothing there. The envelope had disappeared the previous evening. Then she searched everywhere. Gift boxes, storage bins, reception leftovers, anything, nothing. The envelope was gone, because David had already retrieved it. Karen told me Emily became frantic. Not upset, not embarrassed, frantic. She called the wedding venue. No luck. She contacted event staff. No luck. She called guests. No luck. Then she started calling me. Again, and again, and again. I glanced at my phone while Karen described everything. The call log was almost comical. 23 missed calls, 12 text messages, multiple voicemails, all from Emily. A woman who had barely tolerated my existence for years suddenly seemed desperate to speak with me. Interesting. Very interesting. Karen hesitated. Then she asked the question everyone seemed afraid to ask. Are you going to call her back? I looked through the window. The answer came easily. No, Karen sighed. I don't blame you. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a long time. Part of me felt vindicated. Not proud, not happy. Vindicated. For years, people had dismissed my concerns. For years, I had questioned my own instincts. Now the truth stood fully exposed. The problem was that vindication didn't erase the hurt. Nothing could change what happened. Nothing could erase the memory of that trash can. Nothing could erase Michael's silence. That thought hurt most of all. Around noon, my phone rang again. Michael. This time, I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard him exhale heavily. Mom? His voice sounded different, broken, ashamed. Hi. Michael. Another pause. Then, is it true? I knew exactly what he meant. Yes. Silence. Long silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. You bought us a house. I closed my eyes. Not because I regretted it, because hearing the pain in his voice reminded me how much I still loved him. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? A sad smile touched my lips. It was supposed to be a surprise. The silence that followed felt endless. Then I heard something unexpected. Michael crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears. The kind a grown man tries desperately to hide. I'm so sorry. My heart ached. Not because of the apology, because he genuinely meant it. For the first time since the wedding, I believed that. I'm sorry. Mom. I swallowed hard. Michael. No. His voice shook. I should have stopped her. The truth of that statement hung heavily between us. Because he was right. He should have. Not because of the house, because it was wrong, because respect matters, because family matters, because silence can hurt almost as much as cruelty. I froze. He whispered. I didn't know what to do. I believed him. The problem was that believing him didn't erase the damage. Finally, he asked the question he was truly calling to ask. Can we come see you? Not we. Not Emily and I. We. The word mattered. I considered it carefully. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted more time, more distance, more peace. But another part of me recognized something important. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the future of my family. We can talk. Relief flooded his voice. Thank you. Then came the next question. The one I had expected. Will you talk to Emily? I stared out the window, thinking, remembering, the wedding, the insults, the trash can, the years of disrespect. Finally, I answered, I'll listen. Nothing more. Nothing less. Michael understood immediately. Okay. After we ended the call, I received another text. This one from Emily. For several minutes. I debated whether to read it. Eventually, curiosity won. The message was short. Susan, I made a terrible mistake. Please let me explain. I never knew what was inside the envelope. I'm so sorry. Emily. I stared at the screen. Then read it again. Something bothered me. Not what it said, what it didn't say. There was no mention of my feelings. No mention of disrespect. No mention of humiliation. Only the envelope. Only the mistake. Only what she hadn't known. And that distinction mattered. A lot. Because if the envelope had contained a simple greeting card, would she still be apologizing? Would she still be calling? Would she still care? Deep down, I already knew the answer, and for the first time since the wedding, I began preparing for the conversation that was coming. Because sooner or later, Emily Parker was going to sit across from me. She was going to apologize. She was going to cry. She was going to ask for forgiveness. And I intended to find out whether she regretted hurting me or regretted losing a $400,000 house. 3 days after the wedding, Michael and Emily came to my house. I spent the entire morning preparing myself for the meeting. Not because I was afraid, because I knew how important the conversation would be. Some moments shape the future of a family. This was one of them. No matter what happened, things would never return to the way they had been before the wedding. Trust had been broken. Respect had been tested. And now, the truth had to be faced. Around 2 o'clock, I saw Michael's SUV pull into the driveway. My stomach tightened. I looked through the window as they stepped out. Michael appeared exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His shoulders sagged. He looked like a man carrying far more weight than he knew how to handle. Emily looked different too. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't appear perfectly composed. No designer handbag, no carefully curated smile, no air of superiority. She looked nervous, terrified. Even. I opened the door before they could knock. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Michael stepped forward and hugged me. The gesture caught me by surprise. His arms tightened around me. I've missed you. The pain in his voice was unmistakable. I hugged him back, because despite everything, he was still my son, still the little boy I'd spent my life protecting. When we finally pulled apart, Emily stood awkwardly near the porch, waiting, uncertain. I stepped aside. Come in. The three of us moved into the living room. The atmosphere felt heavy, like a courtroom before a verdict. Nobody knew where to begin. Finally, Emily spoke. Susan. Her voice trembled. I sat quietly. She took a deep breath. I'm so sorry. I nodded. Nothing more. Emily glanced at Michael before continuing. What I did at the wedding was horrible. Still, I remained silent. She swallowed. I was irrespectful. Silence. I embarrassed you. Silence. I hurt you. Silence. The room seemed to grow more uncomfortable with every passing second, because apologies sound very different when the person receiving them doesn't immediately offer forgiveness. Emily shifted nervously. I never should have treated you that way. Finally, I spoke. No, the single word hung in the air. No, you shouldn't have. Emily lowered her eyes. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my heart since receiving her text. Why are you sorry? Emily blinked. What? I leaned forward slightly. Why are you sorry? Her expression became confused. Because I hurt you. I studied her face. Years of working as a nurse had taught me something valuable. People reveal more than they realize. Not through words, through hesitation, through body language, through the tiny moments between sentences. And right now, Emily looked trapped, because she wasn't expecting the question. I hurt you, she repeated. I nodded slowly. Then let's talk about that. The room grew quiet again. I folded my hands in my lap. Do you remember the restaurant downtown 8 months ago? Emily looked surprised. What? The restaurant? She frowned. I'm not sure. I am. Her eyes shifted. I continued. You told me Michael would have a very different life from the one I had. Michael turned toward Emily. Immediately, I saw the confusion on his face. Emily's expression tightened. Susan? No, My voice remained calm. Let's be honest today. Nobody interrupted. For years, I had stayed silent. Not anymore. I continued. You mocked my clothes. Emily looked away. You mocked my home. Silence. You mocked my values. More silence. You excluded me from wedding planning. Michael stared at his wife. The confusion in his eyes slowly transformed into disbelief. I continued. You told people I didn't fit the image of your wedding. Emily's head snapped upward. For the first time, genuine panic appeared on her face. Michael looked stunned. What? Nobody answered immediately. I held Emily's gaze. You remember saying that, don't you? The silence lasted several seconds. Finally, she whispered, Yes. Michael's face lost color. You said that. Emily turned toward him. It wasn't like that. I almost laughed. How many times had I heard that phrase? It wasn't like that. People always say that when they run out of excuses. It was exactly like that, I said quietly. Michael stared at his wife, then back at me, then back at her. The realization unfolding across his face broke my heart. because this wasn't just my truth anymore. It was becoming his. Emily looked desperate. Susan, I was stressed. I nodded. Okay. The wedding was overwhelming. Okay. I wasn't thinking clearly. Okay. Every response seemed to frustrate her more. Because I wasn't arguing. I wasn't attacking. I was simply listening. And the more she spoke, the weaker her excuses sounded. Finally, Emily said the thing I had been waiting for. I didn't know there was a house. The room became completely silent. There it was. The truth. The real reason we were sitting here. Not respect. Not family. Not emotional wounds. The house. The moment she said it, everything changed. I looked directly into her eyes. Thank you. Emily blinked. What? Thank you for being honest. Confusion crossed her face. I continued. That's the first thing you've said today that I believe completely. Michael closed his eyes. I saw the pain hit him because he understood exactly what I meant. Emily's entire apology had just shifted focus. Not to my feelings. Not to my humiliation. To the fact that she hadn't known what she was throwing away. I leaned back, then asked the question that had haunted me for days. If the envelope had contained a greeting card, neither of them spoke. If it had contained a $20 gift card, silence. If there had been no house, Emily looked down. I finished the sentence. Would you be sitting here right now? The silence that followed felt endless, because everyone in the room already knew the answer. Even Emily. Tears began forming in her eyes, but somehow they didn't move me. Maybe that sounds harsh, but tears aren't always proof of remorse. Sometimes they're proof of consequences. Finally, Michael spoke. The sadness in his voice was devastating. Emily. She looked at him. His eyes were full of disappointment. Not anger. Disappointment. And somehow, that seemed worse. Answer her. Emily stared at the floor. Several seconds passed. Then more. Finally, she whispered, I don't know. Michael physically recoiled, as though she'd slapped him. The room fell silent once again, and in that moment, I realized something important. The meeting had never been about convincing me. It was about revealing the truth, not just to me, to Michael. For the first time since the wedding, he was seeing his wife clearly, without excuses, without illusions, without the protective filter of love. And what he was seeing seemed to break his heart. After Michael and Emily left my house, I sat alone in the living room for nearly an hour. The silence felt heavy, not uncomfortable, just sad. For years, I had worried about what would happen if Michael ever saw Emily the way I saw her. Now it was happening, and there was no satisfaction in it, only heartbreak. Because when someone you love discovers a painful truth, you don't celebrate. You grieve alongside them. Even when that truth has been obvious to everyone else. Over the next few days, Michael called me regularly. Sometimes we talked for an hour, sometimes only a few minutes. But there was something different about our conversations. For the first time in years, he sounded uncertain, thoughtful, as though he were re-examining memories he had once accepted without question. The illusion was cracking, and once cracks appear, it's impossible not to notice them. 3 days after our meeting, Michael called late in the evening. I could immediately hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Mom. Hi. Sweetheart." He sighed heavily. I think I missed a lot. I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I waited. Sometimes, people need space to reach conclusions on their own. I keep remembering things. His voice sounded distant. Things Emily said. I listened quietly. Things she did. Another pause. And suddenly, they don't seem normal anymore. My heart ached, because I had lived through that realization myself. Once you stop making excuses for someone, their behavior becomes impossible to ignore. "What kind of things?" I asked gently. Michael laughed bitterly. Where do I start? The sadness in his voice broke my heart. For years, he had believed he was living inside a loving relationship. Now he was discovering something much more complicated. He continued. "Do you remember when we bought furniture for the apartment?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Emily refused to shop anywhere that wasn't expensive. I remembered. At the time, I thought she simply had strong preferences. Michael continued. "I suggested several places." He laughed again. No humor in it. She acted like I was asking her to live in a cardboard box. The memories were starting to connect, one by one, like pieces of a puzzle. Then there was my promotion. What about it? Michael hesitated. I wasn't offered the position she wanted. I frowned. What do you mean? The promotion was good. His voice tightened. Really good. But it wasn't prestigious enough for Emily. That statement hit harder than I expected, because I could hear the realization behind it. Emily hadn't been disappointed for Michael. She had been disappointed for herself. There was a difference, a very important difference. Over the following weeks, similar conversations continued. Each one revealed another piece of the truth, a forgotten argument, a dismissed opinion, a subtle insult, a controlling decision, things Michael had ignored because he loved her, things he now saw clearly. One Saturday afternoon, he came to visit alone. The moment he walked through the front door, I knew something was wrong. He looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying a burden he couldn't put down. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Michael stared into his cup and asked, Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you known? I already understood the question. How long had I known Emily wasn't the person she pretended to be? I considered my answer carefully. Not known. Michael looked up. What? I suspected. He frowned. Since when? I sighed. A long time. The silence stretched between us. Then I told him everything, not to hurt him, not to punish Emily, simply because he deserved the truth. The comments, the insults, the wedding planning, the restaurant conversation, the things I'd overheard, the countless moments I had chosen not to share. As I spoke, Michael's expression changed repeatedly. Shock, disbelief, anger, sadness. By the time I finished, he looked devastated. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out almost as a whisper. I smiled sadly. "Because you loved her." His eyes filled with pain. "Mom." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You were happy." "I thought I was." The sentence nearly broke my heart. Because it was honest, painfully honest. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then, Michael looked away. "You know what's worst?" I waited. The wedding wasn't even the first time. I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" His expression darkened. There were other moments. The memories were clearly flooding back now. Moments he'd ignored. Moments he'd excused. Moments he could no longer explain away. "She always criticized people." He stared at the table. "My coworkers. My friends. My boss. My family." The pattern suddenly became obvious. Not just to him, to me. Emily constantly judged others. Their jobs, their income, their appearance, their status. Nothing was ever enough. No achievement ever satisfied her for long. No success ever felt complete. There was always someone richer, someone more impressive, someone more important. The problem wasn't money. The problem was emptiness. No amount of status could fill it. Michael rubbed his face. "I didn't see it." I squeezed his hand. "Because you wanted the best in her." His eyes met mine. For a moment, he looked like a little boy again. Lost, confused, hurting. "I thought marriage would make everything better." That sentence echoed something I had once believed myself. How many people convince themselves that a wedding will solve problems that already exist? How many people believe commitment will magically transform character? The answer, unfortunately, is a lot. I quietly asked, "How are things now?" The silence that followed told me everything. Finally, he spoke. "We fight constantly." I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. "About what?" Michael laughed bitterly. "The house." There it was. Again. The house. The shadow hanging over everything. He continued. "Emily keeps saying we should talk to you." I raised an eyebrow. "Talk? Convince you?" His voice filled with frustration. "Negotiate." I stared at him. "Negotiate what?" "The house." The absurdity nearly made me laugh. Nearly. Instead, I felt something colder. Disappointment. Because even now, Emily still didn't understand. This had never been a business transaction. It had been about respect, love, family, trust. And once those things were broken, money couldn't repair them. Michael shook his head. The more she talks about it, the worse it gets. His voice cracked slightly. It's like that's all she cares about. The statement hung heavily in the room, because deep down, he already knew it was true. The hardest part wasn't discovering Emily's flaws. The hardest part was realizing how much of their relationship had been built around appearances. A week later, Michael called again. This time, his voice sounded different. Not confused, not uncertain, resolved. Something had changed. Something significant. Mom? Yes. We had a huge fight. I sat upright. What happened? The pause lasted several seconds. Then he answered, and the words that came next would change everything. Emily finally said what she really thinks. When Michael told me that Emily had finally said what she really thought, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Deep down, I had been expecting this moment for a long time. The masks people wear eventually become too heavy to carry. Sooner or later, they slip. And when they do, the truth comes out. What happened? I asked quietly. For several seconds, Michael didn't answer. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the phone, trying to collect himself, trying to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. We were arguing about the house again. Of course they were. The house had become the center of everything, not because of its value, because it exposed motivations, character, priorities, the things people normally try to hide. Michael continued. She kept saying we needed to talk to you. I remained silent. Then she started talking about what the house could do for us. I frowned. What do you mean? The mortgage we'd avoid, the money we'd save, the future we'd have. None of that surprised me. A free house would certainly change someone's financial future. But something in Michael's voice told me there was more. A lot more. Then what happened? He laughed bitterly. Eventually, I told her to stop. I sat up straighter. What did she say? The pause lasted several seconds. Then Michael spoke in a voice I barely recognized. She asked me if I was really willing to throw away $400,000 just because my mother got her feelings hurt. I closed my eyes. There it was. The sentence. The moment. The truth. Not a misunderstanding. Not wedding stress. Not poor judgment. A complete inability to understand what had actually happened. Michael continued. I couldn't believe she said it. Neither could I. And yet, somehow, I could. Because Emily had spent years viewing everything through the lens of value and status. To her, money solved problems. Possessions created success. Appearances created worth. The idea that respect might matter more than property simply didn't fit her world view. What did you say? I told her it wasn't about the house. His voice hardened. For the first time, I actually stood up to her. I felt a small surge of pride. Not because he was arguing with his wife, because he was finally defending what was right. Michael continued. I told her you didn't deserve what happened. Silence. Then she laughed. The word landed heavily. Laughed Yeah. His voice tightened. She said everyone was acting like she'd committed a crime. I felt my chest tighten. Not from anger, from sadness. Because even now, Emily didn't understand. Or perhaps she understood perfectly and simply didn't care. Sometimes those possibilities are equally painful. What happened after that? I asked. Michael sighed. We kept arguing. The conversation had apparently gone on for nearly an hour, back and forth, round and round, excuses, blame, justifications, deflections. Every attempt Emily made to avoid responsibility only revealed more about her character. Then the argument reached a breaking point. According to Michael, he finally asked the question I had asked days earlier. If there wasn't a house, would you even care? The silence that followed had apparently lasted a long time, long enough to provide an answer. Eventually, Emily spoke, and what she said shattered something inside him. Honestly, Michael stopped speaking. The memory clearly hurt. I waited. Finally, he continued. She said probably not. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because what was there to say? The honesty was shocking. But not because of the words. Because she had finally stopped pretending. After years of manipulation, years of appearances, years of carefully crafted images, the truth had finally stepped into the light. And it wasn't pretty. Then she said something worse. I braced myself. What? Michael exhaled slowly. She said your gift only became important after she learned what it was worth. The sentence hung heavily between us because it revealed everything. Not just about the wedding, not just about the house, about how Emily viewed people, relationships, family, worth, everything. My heart broke for Michael. Not because of what Emily thought of me. I had known for a long time. Because of what he was learning about the woman he married. The woman he believed he knew. The woman he had promised to spend his life with. The following Saturday, Michael came over again. This time, he looked worse. The exhaustion had deepened. The sadness sat permanently behind his eyes. We sat on the back porch, drinking coffee. Neither of us mentioned Emily at first. Instead, we talked about ordinary things, work, the weather, a baseball game, normal conversation, the kind families have when they're trying to avoid painful topics. Eventually, Michael broke the silence. I don't know what happened. I looked at him. What do you mean? I don't know how I missed all of this. The question wasn't really directed at me. It was directed at himself. A man trying to understand his own blindness. I smiled sadly. Love does that sometimes. He stared into his coffee. I thought I was building a future. You were. His eyes lifted. What? You were building a future? I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You just didn't realize who you were building it with. The words seemed to hit him hard. Because they were true. He had entered the marriage with good intentions. Hope. Commitment. Trust. Those things weren't mistakes. The mistake was believing they existed equally on both sides. A few days later, something happened that removed any remaining doubt. Michael called me late at night. His voice sounded hollow, empty. defeated. "Mom, what happened?" For several seconds, he didn't answer. Then he said, "I heard her." My stomach tightened. Heard her doing what? Talking to her friend. Immediately, I understood. Those accidental moments, the ones where people reveal their true selves because they think nobody is listening. The same kind of moment that had revealed Emily's feelings before the wedding. "What did she say?" Michael's voice cracked. "She said the whole situation was unfair." I waited. "She said your decision was irrational." Another pause. Then, "She said any reasonable person would have forgiven her after discovering the truth." The pain in his voice was devastating. Because even now, Emily still viewed everything through the lens of the house. Not the disrespect, not the humiliation, not the years of behavior, just the lost opportunity. Then came the worst part. Michael swallowed hard. "She said she couldn't stop thinking about what she'd lost." I closed my eyes. The house. Always the house. Not the relationship. Not the family. Not me. The house. A long silence followed. Finally, Michael whispered, "I don't think she understands what she actually lost." My chest tightened, because for the first time since the wedding, I realized something. Emily wasn't just losing a house. She was losing trust, respect, family, and perhaps most tragically, she was losing Michael, the man who had spent years loving her, the man who had defended her, the man who had chosen her. And the saddest part was that she still seemed more concerned about property than the marriage itself. As our conversation ended that night, I sensed something had changed permanently. Michael was no longer confused, no longer uncertain, no longer searching for excuses. He was seeing the truth clearly now. And once someone truly sees the truth, there's no way to unsee it. What neither of us knew was that the final confrontation was approaching much faster than expected, because the Parker family had decided they wanted a meeting that would bring both families together, a meeting they believed would pressure me into changing my decision. Instead, it would become the moment every secret finally came into the open. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday afternoon. If someone had told me a month earlier that both families would eventually gather to discuss a wedding gift, I would have laughed. But by that point, the house had become symbolic of something much larger. Respect, character, trust. The meeting wasn't really about property anymore. It was about truth, and everyone involved knew it. The request had come from Robert Parker, Emily's father. According to Michael, Robert believed the entire situation had gotten out of control. He wanted everyone in the same room. He wanted misunderstandings resolved. Most importantly, he wanted peace. What he didn't realize was that peace cannot exist without honesty. And honesty was exactly what Emily had been avoiding. The meeting took place in a private room at a local country club. Neutral ground, neither my home nor theirs. When I arrived, David Mitchell was already waiting. I had asked him to come, not as a lawyer, not as an advocate, as a witness, someone who knew the full story, someone who had seen everything from the beginning. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I smiled. As ready as I'll ever be. A few minutes later, the Parkers arrived. Robert Parker entered first, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and a serious expression. Behind him came Linda Parker. She looked exhausted, almost embarrassed. Emily entered next, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw no confidence in her, no superiority, no arrogance, only anxiety. Michael followed behind her. The moment our eyes met, he gave me a small nod, a silent gesture of support, one that meant more than he probably realized. We all sat down. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The atmosphere felt heavy. Every person in the room understood why we were there. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming." Everyone nodded politely. He continued, "I think we can all agree things have gotten painful." No one disagreed. Robert looked directly at me. "Susan, before anything else, I want to say I'm sorry." The room fell silent. His words appeared sincere, unexpectedly sincere. "I wasn't at the gift table when everything happened," he said, "but I've heard enough to know my daughter behaved badly." Emily immediately lowered her eyes. Robert continued, "And for that, I'm sorry." I nodded. "Thank you." He seemed relieved. Perhaps he expected anger, bitterness, hostility. But I had no interest in fighting. The facts were painful enough on their own. Linda spoke next. Her voice was soft. "I wish we had known sooner." There was genuine sadness in her expression. Not for the house, for the situation, for the embarrassment, for the damage. Again, I simply nodded. Then everyone looked toward Emily. The silence stretched. She swallowed hard, then finally spoke. "I'm sorry." Nobody responded. Not immediately. Emily continued. "I know I've said it before." Her voice trembled. "But I really am." I watched her carefully, not judging, simply observing. Years of nursing had taught me how to distinguish between discomfort and sincerity, and I still wasn't sure which one I was seeing. Emily took a deep breath. "I wish I could take back what happened." Again, silence. Then Michael surprised everyone, including me. He leaned forward and asked a simple question. "Why?" The room froze. Emily looked stunned. "What? Why do you wish you could take it back?" His voice remained calm, controlled, but beneath it sat something deeper. Disappointment. Emily stared at him. For several seconds, she couldn't answer, and that silence told its own story. Michael didn't look away. Neither did I. Finally, Emily spoke. "Because I hurt people." The answer sounded rehearsed, practiced, safe. Michael nodded slowly, then asked another question. "Would you still feel that way if there had never been a house?" The room became painfully quiet. Robert shifted in his chair. Linda looked down. David folded his arms. Nobody wanted to interrupt, because everyone understood the importance of the question. Emily looked trapped. Again, just like she had in my living room. And once again, the truth seemed to be fighting its way out. Finally, she whispered. I don't know. Michael closed his eyes. The sadness on his face was devastating. Because he wasn't hearing anything new, he was hearing confirmation. Confirmation of everything he'd already begun to realize. The room remained silent. Then David spoke for the first time. I think there's something everyone should see. He opened a folder. The familiar folder. The same one that had once sat inside a trash can. The same one that contained the deed. David carefully placed several documents on the table. Attorney James Collins had prepared copies earlier that week. Property records, transfer instructions, signed legal documents. Everything. Robert picked up the papers first. His eyes widened. Linda looked over his shoulder. Neither spoke. Finally, Robert exhaled slowly. My God. The value of the gift had become impossible to ignore. But David wasn't finished. He removed another item, a photograph, then another, and another. Pictures of the house. Pictures taken during renovations. Pictures documenting years of work, years of planning, years of love. The room studied them quietly. No one interrupted. No one joked. No one argued, because the evidence spoke for itself. Eventually, David said, Susan spent years preparing this. His voice remained calm. Years. The emphasis mattered, because this wasn't a spontaneous gift. It wasn't wealth casually handed over. It represented sacrifice, commitment, planning, a mother's love. David continued. I was there. He looked directly at Emily. I watched her spend weekends painting walls. Emily lowered her eyes. I watched her select appliances. More silence. I watched her imagine a future for you and Michael. The room grew quieter with every sentence, because the true cost of the gift had never been measured in dollars. It had been measured in years. Finally, David sat back. His point had been made. No further explanation was necessary. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. Robert Parker stood, slowly, deliberately. He looked directly at me. And then, to everyone's surprise, he apologized again. Not as Emily's father, as a man. Susan. His voice was heavy with emotion. I owe you more than an apology. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Robert continued. I spent my entire life teaching my children that character matters more than money. His eyes briefly moved toward Emily. Somewhere along the way, that lesson failed. The words hit hard, especially because they came from her father. Linda wiped away tears. Emily stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time since the wedding, there were no excuses, no blame, no arguments, only truth, raw and uncomfortable, the kind that changes people or breaks them. Then Robert turned toward his daughter, and in front of everyone, he said something that left the entire room silent. Emily, the house was never what you lost. She slowly looked up, confused, tearful, broken. Robert's voice softened. You lost something far more valuable. The room became completely still, because every person present knew exactly what he meant. Trust, respect, family. And perhaps most painfully of all, Michael's faith in her after Robert Parker's words. Nobody spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. Sometimes the truth requires room to settle, room to breathe, room to hurt. Emily sat motionless. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. For the first time since I had known her, nobody was rushing to rescue her from consequences. Nobody was offering excuses. Nobody was blaming stress. Nobody was talking about misunderstandings. The truth stood in the center of the room, and everyone could see it. Eventually, Linda Parker reached for her daughter's hand. Emily immediately grabbed it, like a child seeking safety. The sight stirred unexpected emotions inside me. Not sympathy exactly, but perspective. Because regardless of everything that had happened, Emily was still someone's daughter, still someone who had made mistakes. Terrible mistakes, but mistakes nonetheless. Robert slowly sat down again. The meeting continued. Not with arguments, with honesty. The kind families often avoid because it hurts. Michael was the next person to speak. His voice was calm, far calmer than I expected. I don't care about the house anymore. Everyone looked at him, especially Emily. The statement clearly surprised her. Michael continued. I stopped caring about the house weeks ago. Silence filled the room. I care about trust. His eyes moved toward his wife. And I don't know if I trust you. The words landed harder than any accusation, because they came from the person whose opinion mattered most. Emily immediately began crying harder. Michael, no. His voice remained gentle, but firm. For perhaps the first time in their entire relationship. I need you to listen. Emily lowered her head. Michael continued. For years, I defended you. Nobody interrupted. I defended you to friends. More silence. I defended you to coworkers. He swallowed. And I defended you to my mother. That one hurt. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. Michael looked exhausted, emotionally drained, like a man who had finally reached the end of something. I kept believing every problem was a misunderstanding. Emily stared at the floor. I kept believing people were judging you unfairly. His voice cracked slightly. And then the wedding happened. No one spoke. No one needed to. The wedding had become the moment everything changed. The moment illusion collided with reality. Michael rubbed his forehead, then said something that surprised everyone, including Emily. I don't think the wedding ruined our marriage. Confusion crossed her face. What? Michael looked directly at her. I think it revealed it. The room went silent, completely silent, because those words contained a painful truth. Events rarely create character. They reveal it. The wedding hadn't transformed Emily into someone selfish. It had exposed selfishness that was already there. The house hadn't created greed. It had revealed priorities. The moment was devastating, and yet strangely necessary. Emily cried quietly. For several minutes, nobody interrupted. Finally, she whispered, I know I failed. Michael didn't answer. She continued. I know I've been selfish. Still silence. I know I've cared too much about appearances. More silence. Then she looked directly at me. For the first time that entire afternoon. Not at the table. Not at the paperwork. Not at the house. At me. Susan. Her voice trembled. I don't expect forgiveness. The sentence surprised me because it sounded genuine, more genuine than anything she had said before. She continued. I don't deserve it. The room remained quiet. Then something changed. Not dramatically, not magically, just enough. Emily took a deep breath. I spent years trying to impress people. Tears continued running down her face. I wanted everyone to think I was successful. More silence. I wanted everything to look perfect. Her voice cracked. And somewhere along the way, I started valuing appearances more than people. No one interrupted, because for the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She was examining herself. There was a difference, a huge difference. Emily looked toward her father, then her mother, then Michael. Finally me. I hurt every person in this room. Nobody argued, because she had. The truth didn't require debate. Then she said something I never expected to hear. When I learned about the house, she stopped, collected herself. When I learned what was inside the envelope, my first reaction wasn't guilt. The room became still, painfully still. Emily continued. It was panic. No one spoke. No one moved. I wasn't thinking about Susan. Her honesty was brutal, but honesty nonetheless. I was thinking about what I lost. Michael closed his eyes. Robert lowered his head. Linda quietly cried. Emily continued, and that's when I realized something was wrong with me. The sentence hung in the air, because genuine change often begins with painful self-awareness. Not excuses. Not apologies. Awareness. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Emily turned toward me again. This time, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I considered her words carefully. The truth was complicated. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It doesn't happen because someone asks. It takes time. Trust takes even longer. Finally, I answered. I don't hate you. The room seemed surprised. Even Emily. I continued. Hate is easy. Silence. But trust is difficult. Emily slowly nodded. Tears continued falling, because she understood exactly what I meant. Trust had been broken. Not once, repeatedly, over years. That kind of damage isn't repaired in a single conversation. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Not because every problem was solved, because everyone was emotionally exhausted. As people began standing, gathering papers, and preparing to leave, Michael approached me. Mom. Yes. He hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him for weeks. What happens now? I smiled sadly. A small smile, but a real one. Now, he nodded. I looked around the room, at two families forever changed by a single decision, a single envelope, a single moment. Then I answered, "Now everyone lives with the truth." The drive home felt peaceful. For the first time since the wedding, I sensed closure approaching. Not complete closure, but the beginning of it. Several weeks passed. Then, months. Emily began attending counseling. Not because anyone forced her, because she chose to. Michael moved into a temporary apartment, not because they separated, because they needed space, time, perspective, healing. I watched everything from a distance, no longer trying to control outcomes, no longer carrying responsibility for choices that weren't mine. For the first time in years, I focused on my own life, my own happiness, my own future. And then, 6 months after the wedding, something happened that I never expected. Emily knocked on my front door, alone. No lawyers, no parents, no Michael, just Emily. And what she came to tell me would finally answer the question that had been hanging over all of our lives since the wedding day. Had she actually changed? Or had she simply learned a painful lesson? 6 months after the meeting at the country club, I was sitting on my front porch reading a novel when I heard a car pull into my driveway. At first, I assumed it was Michael. He visited often these days, far more often than he had in years. Our relationship had slowly healed, not because of dramatic conversations, because of consistent actions, phone calls, visits, honesty, respect. The small things that rebuild trust one brick at a time. But when I looked up, it wasn't Michael stepping out of the car. It was Emily, alone. For a moment, neither of us moved. She stood beside her vehicle. I remained seated on the porch. The last time I had seen her was at the family meeting months earlier. Since then, I had heard updates through Michael. Counseling, self-reflection, personal growth. At least, that was what he said. I wasn't sure what to believe. Real change takes time. And time was exactly what had passed. Emily slowly approached the porch. She looked different. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had softened. The need to impress seemed gone. There was something quieter about her now, something more grounded. When she reached the bottom step, she stopped. "Hi, Susan." I closed my book. "Hello, Emily?" She looked nervous, genuinely nervous. Not the kind of nervousness that comes from wanting something. The kind that comes from risking rejection. "Can we talk?" I studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the empty chair beside me. "Sit down." She sat. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. The autumn breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. Life moved forward, as it always does. Finally, Emily spoke. "I didn't come here because of the house." I said nothing. She continued. "I know you'll probably never believe that." For the first time, I smiled slightly. "You're right. A small laugh escaped her. Oddly enough, it sounded genuine. I figured. Silence returned. Then Emily reached into her purse. For a brief second, I wondered what she was doing. Instead of paperwork, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. A letter. She held it carefully. I wrote this months ago. I remained quiet. I just didn't have the courage to bring it. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she handed it to me. I unfolded the paper. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand speeches. No attempts to justify her behavior. No mention of the house. Instead, it contained something far more surprising. Accountability, line after line, page after page. She acknowledged specific moments, the restaurant conversation, the wedding planning, the comments about my clothes, the insults disguised as jokes, the manipulation, the judgment, the arrogance, everything. Nothing was minimized. Nothing was excused. Nothing was blamed on stress. By the time I finished reading, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But peace. Because for the first time, Emily truly understood what she had done. Not what she had lost. What she had done. I folded the letter carefully, then looked at her. Why now? Tears filled her eyes. Because, unlike before, these didn't seem connected to consequences. They seemed connected to regret. I spent months trying to understand why I became that person. She looked down at her hands. I hated what happened. I waited. At first, I hated losing the house. The honesty surprised me. Then she smiled sadly. Then I realized the house wasn't the biggest thing I lost. The words echoed something her father had said months earlier. Emily continued. I lost people's respect. She swallowed. I lost Michael's trust. More silence. I lost the chance to become part of a family that actually loved me. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because despite everything, it was true. I had wanted to love her. From the beginning, I had wanted a daughter. Instead, we ended up here. Two women sitting on a porch surrounded by the consequences of choices neither could undo. I started therapy. I nodded. Michael had mentioned that. Emily smiled faintly. My therapist says something that makes me uncomfortable every week. What? She says I spent most of my life treating self-worth like a competition. The statement sounded painfully accurate. Emily laughed softly. I always thought if people admired me, I'd feel valuable. The sadness in her eyes felt genuine. But admiration never lasted. She looked toward the street. So I kept chasing more. More status, more appearances, more validation. The pattern suddenly seemed obvious. Not just to her, to me. For years, Emily had been trying to fill an emptiness that no amount of success could satisfy. The wedding simply exposed it. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not about the house, about life, mistakes, family, growth, responsibility. For the first time, The conversation felt honest, completely honest. Before leaving, Emily stood, then hesitated. Susan, yes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I nodded. I know. She smiled sadly. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone better. And strangely enough, I believed her. Not because of her words, because of her actions. Months of actions. Growth rarely announces itself dramatically. It reveals itself quietly. Over time. One choice at a time. After she left, I sat on the porch for a long while, thinking, reflecting, remembering. A year later, Michael visited again, this time with exciting news. He had purchased a small townhouse, on his own. Not with my money, not with a gift, through hard work and determination. The pride I felt in that moment was impossible to describe. Even more surprising, Emily stood beside him. Their marriage had survived. Barely, but it had survived. Not because anyone ignored the damage, because both of them confronted it honestly, and that made all the difference. As for the house, the original house, the one inside the envelope, I never transferred it. Instead, I turned it into something meaningful, a transitional home for women rebuilding their lives after difficult circumstances. Single mothers, widows, women starting over, the very people I understood best. The decision felt right. Richard would have loved it. And every time I drive past that house, I smile. Not because of what happened, because of what I learned. People often think the story is about a house. It isn't. The house was never the point. The point was gratitude, character, respect, the things money can never buy. Emily thought she threw away a piece of paper. What she actually threw away was an opportunity. And when she finally understood that, her life changed forever. So did mine. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the most valuable gifts aren't the ones we receive. They're the lessons we learn after we've lost them. Life has a way of revealing people's true character when they least expect it. In this story, the house was never the real gift. The real gift was the love, sacrifice, and intention behind it. Susan spent years preparing a future for her son, not because she expected praise, but because that's what loving parents do. Yet one careless moment exposed a painful truth: gratitude cannot exist where entitlement has taken root. Many of us have experienced something similar. Maybe not with a house, but with our time, our kindness, our loyalty, or our love. We give from the heart and hope it will be appreciated. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. The important lesson is this: kindness should never require us to abandon our self-respect. Forgiveness is powerful, but forgiveness does not mean accepting disrespect. Boundaries are not cruelty. Consequences are not revenge. When Susan chose not to transfer the house, she wasn't punishing Emily. She was protecting her dignity and honoring the value of respect. Another lesson is that people can change, but only when they are willing to face the truth about themselves. Real growth begins when excuses end. Emily's transformation didn't happen because she lost a house. It happened because she finally understood the damage her choices caused. And finally, remember this: the people who truly love you are often the ones making sacrifices you cannot see. Never assume someone's value based on appearances. The quietest person in the room may have the biggest heart. The simplest gift may carry the deepest meaning. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone judged you unfairly? Or have you ever learned an important lesson about gratitude and respect? Please share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoy heartfelt family stories with meaningful life lessons, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future stories. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love hearing from viewers around the world.